When I think back to how it all began, I can't believe how small the first steps were and how enormous the consequences turned out to be. I never saw myself as the kind of man who would throw everything away. I was quiet, reserved, always careful, but it turns out even the most cautious people can get swept into something they don't understand. I wasn't brave, I wasn't even adventurous, but I had a little bit of money saved up and thought that would be enough to give me some peace after years of working without thanks. I heard people talk about the Philippines, how the cost of living was lower, how life could be easier, and how a man could start fresh. I let myself believe it because I wanted something like that to be true so badly. I told myself I wasn't taking any kind of risk. I was just trying something new and different, and that even if it didn't work out, I would still have a cushion to fall back on. Later down the line, I would realize that I was lying to myself all along, without realizing it. Angeles City was not what I expected, and yet at the same time it gave me something I had never felt before. Attention, excitement, and a sense that maybe I wasn't invisible after all. I didn't arrive with any wild plans or big dreams. I only arrived with the hope that I could feel a little happier and a little less lonely, and maybe spend what I'd worked for something that felt like it had meaning. What I didn't see, what I should have seen, was that everything around me was designed to pull money from me until nothing was left. I was strong enough to say no. Never. I wasn't confident enough to walk away, and before long I was too far into stop. That's how I ended up, broke, broken, and replaying all of it over in my head, and wondering how a man, like me, could lose everything so fast. The first time I set foot in the Philippines, I was already 60 years old, and I told myself it was finally my turn to try and enjoy life. I'd spent decades working in America, never chasing promotions and never really making much noise. I just did what was asked of me, hoping that one day it would all pay off. I didn't come from any money, and I never built a fortune. But by the time I stopped working, I had managed to put a little aside. Enough that I thought it would take me through my later years if I was careful. I wasn't rich, not by any stretch, but I had about $200,000 between savings, a little bit in a pension, and what I got from selling my small house. When I read stories about how far money went in the Philippines, I thought it would be more than enough. It seemed to be. But back in America, that kind of money wouldn't last, everyone knows that. But I'd convinced myself that in a place where things were a lot cheaper, I could stretch it out and maybe even find happiness that I'd missed in my earlier life. The truth is, I'd always been a little invisible, the kind of man who blended into the background, and I thought maybe by going somewhere new, I could feel seen for once. That was just the hope anyway. I didn't arrive with wild ideas. I didn't think I was going to live like a king. I just thought I would finally get to breathe without the constant weight of bills and the feeling that I was always behind. Looking back, I realized how naive I was, because money disappears faster than you can ever imagine when you don't understand the world you're stepping into. At the time, though, I felt proud of myself, proud that I'd actually taken the chance, and proud I'd done something different at 60 years old, when most people had already given up. I thought I'd done everything right, and I had no idea that what I believed was enough would end up vanishing right in front of me. The journey to get there was long, and by the time I reached Manila, I was already worn out. I then had to connect all the way up to Clark in Angeles, and even though that second leg only took a little while, the wait in Manila was very uncomfortable. Too many people crammed all into the terminal, and it was a heat there that made you feel like you really need to get away. When I finally walked out of Clark International, the driver I'd arranged was holding a sign with my name, and the ride into Angeles was no more than 30 minutes. It was dark by then, and as soon as the taxi turned onto Fields Avenue, right into Red Street, I realized I was seeing something unlike anything back home. Neon lit up the road in every direction. Kokomo's sat right at the corner with its open frontis. Atlantis stood out with bright lights and music. And just along the way, Dollhouse had its own big sign glowing above the entrance. Girls stood outside, rows of them smiling, waving, and calling out to men passing by, and I couldn't look away. Back in America, nobody ever noticed me, but here it seemed impossible to go unseen. Music pounded out of every doorway, different songs clashing with each other, and motorbikes zigzagged through the cars, although, at the time at least, they weren't down Red Street. People crowded the sidewalks. I didn't know where to look first. It was too much to take in all at once, yet I found myself trying to see everything. The hotel I'd booked was just off Fields, a short turn away, and even as the taxi pulled off the main strip, I could still hear the sound of the bars carrying into the night. Passing along smaller places along the side streets, I saw women sitting at tables outside, watching every man who walked by, and I thought to myself that I'd never seen a place like this all my life. By the time the driver stopped outside my hotel, I already knew Angeles was going to change me, whether I wanted it to or not. By the time I reached a hotel, I thought I would just collapse onto the bed, but the minute I dropped my bag, sleep wasn't going to happen. I'd been drained on the plane, nodding off between meals and waiting in Manila, yet standing there in that small hotel room in Angeles, I felt nervous, yet energized, and I couldn't control. I turned on the shower, let the water run over me, and before long I'd dried off properly, and I was pulling on clean clothes. I hadn't planned to go anywhere. I told myself this first night would just be a relaxing one, but it was impossible to sit still knowing that Red Street was only a walk away. I stepped outside and the sound carried before I even turned the corner. All the music coming out from all the bars, and you heard the trikes and all the other noise that went along with such a place, all mixing together. It was like a steady noise, but it was appealing and attracting, even though it wasn't a pleasant sound. The closer I got, the brighter it became, and the whole strip was alive with coloured lights and bars open wide to the street. Groups of girls lined at the entrances, smiling and waving and laughing together as they watched every man who walked by. I kept my eyes forward, just moving along, step by step. I was too shy to look back at anyone directly, but taking in every detail at the same time, I was just shocked about how different it was to anything I knew. I stopped outside a place that had a pool table set up near the front, and the staff were calling me to come inside. Hand gestures and smiles, and I gave a small nod. Awkwardly, because I was still shy and unaware of how things happened here. And before I knew it, there was a beer in front of me, and I was sitting under the glow of the lights, listening to music. I watched people outside keep moving, foreigners of every age walking past. Some of them had girls with them, others just drifting alone like I did. I told myself what would only be one drink, but it turned into more. It was so different, yet I was in the moment, and I didn't want to be anywhere else. That first night I didn't go much further than that, but it was enough to change everything for me. I moved from one bar to the next along Red Street, and the girls were pulling at me from every doorway. Some of them asked me to come inside, and some of them just pointed and said, "Come here," and I gave in without much thought. I kept buying drinks for me and them, and I didn't notice how fast the money was going until I reached for more and saw how many bills were already gone. The music was so loud, so it was difficult to think, but I stayed anyway, drinking one beer after another, trying to act like I belonged there, even though I had no idea what I was doing. By the time I stepped outside again, it was close to 3 a.m, and the street looked almost the same as it did when I first walked down it. The lights were still flashing, and the music was still going, and the girls were still calling out to anyone who passed. I couldn't believe it. I walked slowly back towards my hotel. I was unsteady because I was quite drunk, but the sound was still all around me. The guard at the entrance didn't say anything as I went inside the hotel, but I could tell he knew exactly where I'd been, and that was something he'd seen so many hundreds and thousands of times before. I went straight upstairs, and I can remember not even undressing, lying on the bed, and the next morning, waking up, all my clothes still on, but my head feeling heavy after the night before. For a while, I'd just lay there, not coming to terms with what had happened, staring at the ceiling, not thinking about anything. It felt strange, but it was a different kind of strange, and I was caught up in something that I didn't even realize. At that point, I didn't realize how this was going to change me forever. I walked out of the hotel that next day, just after 1 in the afternoon. I was still tired from the night before, but restless at the same time. I thought everything would be quiet at that hour, but when I turned onto the corner onto Red Street, I just couldn't believe it yet again. The bars already open, music already onto the roads, and girls sitting outside watching for anyone who passed. I was in shock yet again. Back in America, you'd never see anything like that. Not in the middle of the day, and I felt a new surge of energy run through me yet again. I stood there for a moment, unsure of myself. I was a bit nervous, and I'm just curious because I didn't believe that you could be there in the middle of the day, and it was like the place has never closed. One of the girls waved me over, smiling, and I felt a bit awkward, just standing there, so I went inside. Another beer, and before I had taken 2 sips, she was sitting next to me, asking questions and leaning in close and smiling all the time. I just wasn't used to that kind of attention, and I could feel myself going red and starting to blush. Then another girl came over, and another, and before long I'm buying them all drinks. I just said yes, because I didn't know how to say no, and I didn't want to seem rude. I sat there watching the bottles being opened, and the glasses were filling the table, and I couldn't quite believe it was me sitting there. When I left that bar and stepped into another, a few doors down, the same thing happened again, and again after that. By the evening, I had no idea how much money I spent, but the thing was, I didn't care. I walked back to the hotel feeling really shocked, but inside my head, it was racing. Just what I'd seen shocked me. I didn't know how to handle it in the moment. Again, falling on bed like the night before, without turning out the light. Nothing mattered, apart from getting to sleep as quickly as possible. The next day, I told myself, probably not going to do that again. But after a shower and a change of clothes, I went out of the door the same time as the day before. I felt pulled back, not thinking about it, and the same thing happened all over again, and again, for over a week. That week went by as one of the fastest of my life. After another couple of weeks, I knew I couldn't stay in the hotel much longer. I hadn't come for a break, I'd come here to retire, and if I was serious about it, then I needed somewhere of my own. The hotel was fine for the first days, but it wasn't home, and I didn't want to keep living out of a suitcase. By then, I'd already settled into a routine, afternoons in the bars on Red Street and late nights walking back. The thought of going back to America never crossed my mind. I was 60 and there was nothing waiting for me there, and I told myself I had enough put aside to make this retirement actually work. So I went to one of the local agents and asked where they had any rooms for me to look at. They showed me a list of apartments and small houses, and over the next few days I went to look. Sometimes they took me in a car and sometimes on a trike when the place was closer. I found the apartments to be basic, usually white walls, tiled floors, but they were clean and seemed to be just basic places. Houses were even smaller, but usually a little bit more run down than the apartments, a bit older and a bit different. Some of them had gates out of front, and some of them were tucked down some narrow side streets, which seemed to get more run down the further you went from the main areas. Nothing was a fancy place that I had the budget for, but I didn't care. I remember standing in one of the apartments, just looking out, thinking that this is all I need. I wasn't looking for a fancy or luxury place, just for a place that I could feel settled, where I could walk back from the bars at night. That's all I was thinking about. Every place I saw made it clearer that I was going to be staying there for good, because I kept telling myself it was just an easy adjustment, something different to do. Small place. All I needed was a small place so I could start living properly. I didn't want to be in the hotel all the time, and I wanted to be in the bars, yet I wanted a place of permanence that made it feel more real, because it was starting to feel like I needed a place to... Because it was starting to feel like I needed a place of permanence if I wanted this to continue. I signed for an apartment and moved in a few days later. 1-bedroom place, tiled floors, nothing special. But when the keys were handed to me, it felt like I'd finally crossed the line from being someone there exploring retirement to actually being retired. This time I could finally unpack my whole bag and hung my clothes in the closet. I told myself this was the start of my retirement now, and all I needed to do was live it. I did think that having my own place would slow me down a bit. Maybe I'd read more, watch TV at night, but it didn't happen. The first afternoon, I was already back out of the door heading towards Red Street. I told myself it would just be one drink. But once I sat down in a bar, I didn't leave until long after dark. And the same thing happened the next day and the day after that. Every time a new day came around, I tried my best to do something else. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't function properly, as all I thought about was the life I wanted to live. And I gave in to the temptation every single time. I always said to myself, tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow was never different. The girls come over and sit with you as soon as you walk in, and they'd ask me where I'd been, telling me to sit down, and once they asked for drinks, I just didn't refuse. One beer turned into another, and soon the table was full of glasses and bottles, and I hadn't planned on paying for any of them. I lost track of the hours and only thought about how quickly I could get back the next day. I told myself it didn't matter because the apartment rent was so cheap and the utilities were even cheaper, and I had plenty of money left. That thought gave me the excuse I needed to keep spending a lot more money. A week passed, then another, and soon a month's gone and nothing to show for it but all these bills that I'd been paying for at the bars. The apartment was just a place to crash. That was it. Between nights out, only a room, and I barely noticed it. It was just a bed and a shower. I told myself this was retirement, this was freedom, but underneath, I already knew I was caught in something I just couldn't pull myself out of. 6 months went by. I stopped to look at where I was. Every day was the same. Afternoons in the bars on Red Street, nights that carried on until the morning, and then sleeping half the day away. I kept telling myself that this was retirement and I'd earned it, but I knew I couldn't break free from it. Even in the mornings when I said I'd stay in, by the afternoon I was already showered and heading back out the door. It carried on like that until one morning I opened my account and looked at the numbers properly. Out of the $200,000 I had brought with me, half of it was gone. $100,000 had disappeared in 6 months, and I didn't need anyone to explain where it went. Drinks and girls and rent and food and night after night, all of it draining me without me paying attention. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew it was true. It hit me hard because I'd always thought I was careful with money, and now I'd thrown away more than I ever thought I could in such a short time. I felt ashamed of myself, and I felt sick about what to do. I knew if I stayed in Angeli's, it would only get worse. I couldn't keep going on like that, and the thought of watching the rest of it disappear made me feel like I had to move before it was too late. Going back to America wasn't possible. I'd already left that life behind, and I didn't want to go back. I told myself I needed to get away, just for a little bit of a time, to put some distance between me and Red Street. Cebu was the answer I came up with, close enough that it wasn't a big deal to get there, but it was far enough away that I might be able to clear my head. I booked a flight, packed a bag, and left the apartment behind. Walking out, I felt the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me, and I knew I couldn't carry on the way I was. When I arrived in Cebu, I thought I'd finally made the right decision. It was calmer and slower, yet busy at the same time. And for the first couple of days, I almost managed to convince myself I could settle into this way of life. I walked around the city in the afternoons, sat in coffee shops, and ate at small local restaurants, and told myself that perhaps this is what I should have been doing all along. For a short while, it felt like a weight had been lifted. I liked that people hardly noticed me and nobody tried to drag me into anything, and I thought maybe this was the clean break I needed. But by the fourth day, the cracks had started to show. I kept thinking about Angeli's. I missed the noise, the neon, and the pull of Red Street, the girls waiting as soon as I came into sight. Lying in bed at night, I just couldn't sleep. My head was replaying the music and voices from the bars I'd walked away from. I tried to fill the time in Cebu by walking through malls or taking rides across the city, but nothing worked. The feeling of being away grew heavier until it was all I could think about. After just a week, I couldn't take it anymore. I booked a flight back to Clark without even thinking about it. When the plane touched down and the taxi took me into town, I didn't even stop at my apartment. I told the driver to go straight to Red Street. The moment I stepped out and saw the lights, it was like breathing again after holding my breath for what seemed like an eternity. I felt a rush of relief that I was back, but at the same time I couldn't believe that I'd given in so quickly. I dragged my bag with me into the first bar I saw, sat down on a stool and ordered a beer, as if I'd never left. Getting back to Angeli's felt like slipping straight into the old rhythm. I didn't even need to think about it. Every afternoon I was back on Red Street. Every night ended the same way with me staggering home, and every morning was wasted lying in bed. Cebu had only been a pause, nothing more, and as soon as I stepped into the bars again, I knew I was back where I left off. I told myself over and over that I needed to change, that I couldn't keep burning through money like this. But the promise has never lasted longer than a few hours. Then, one night, I walked into a bar that I hadn't been in for a long time, and that was when I saw her. She was 21, and the first thing I noticed was how she looked straight at me when I walked in. Not a glance, not a half smile like the others, but her eyes fixed on me as if she had me waiting. I sat down, ordered a beer, and before I'd even taken a sip, she was next to me, asking my name. She kept laughing at everything I said, even when I knew it wasn't funny. She asked where I was staying, what I did back home, and I found myself telling her more than I normally would. I bought her a drink, then another, and the whole time I felt like she was giving me more attention than I was used to. When I left that night, she touched my arm and said, "Come back tomorrow," and I did. The next day, I walked past other bars just to get back to hers, and when she saw me, she waved like I was the only man there. That was when I started telling myself this was different. That maybe if I stayed with her, I wouldn't need to keep sitting in every other bar, spending money on anyone who asked. I thought that might break the cycle, and I convinced myself it was the first real decision I'd made ever since I even arrived in the Philippines. Not long after we started seeing each other, she moved into my apartment. It happened quickly, but it felt right at the same time. Once she was there, I didn't go out to Red Street the way I used to. Most nights I stayed with her, and when I did go to the bars, she came with me. The money I was spending just went right away, and for the first time, I arrived in Angeli's. I thought maybe I could keep things under control. I told myself having her with me was what I needed. She was from Leyte, and in the evenings she would talk about her family back there. She told me about the house they lived in and how small it was, and how the typhoon from years back left it in a bad shape. I listened, and I found myself feeling closer to her than I felt with anyone for years. I started thinking that I was actually in love. I thought maybe she could keep me on track, that if I held on to her, I wouldn't fall back into the same cycle that almost ruined me. The more we talked, the more the idea grew that we could leave Angeli's altogether and go to her province. She told me it wouldn't take much to build a basic house there for as low as $20,000. When I heard that number, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had wasted more than 5 times that in the bars without even knowing what I was doing, but this would be very different. This would be something that was real and tangible and something that didn't disappear with the next drink. I told myself if I put money into a house, I would have something that could reduce my expenses, and it would tie me to her in a way that nothing else could. I started to believe building that house could be the answer to everything, and with what money I had left, I should be able to stretch it for years and years, and at the same time give me the reason I needed to stop throwing the rest of my money into the bars. When she took me to Leyte for the first time, I felt a change in myself right away because it wasn't Angeli's. There were no bars pulling me in, no traffic that were pressing on me all the time, and no noise I couldn't escape. And the fact I was with her made it possible. Cebu was different because I was alone and it was difficult. But now I'm finding myself sitting with her family who welcomed me even though they didn't know me. They accepted me without question, no talk of the age difference, and it gave me a sense that maybe I could fit into something again instead of drifting with no direction. At night, I would sit with her outside and my mind worked differently than it had before. I wasn't planning the next bar. I was thinking about how much money I had left and whether I could really make it stretch. I had around 70,000 left and told myself if I put 20,000 into a house, that would be 50 left. And if we lived on $400 a month, it might just work. I went over it again and again until it seemed possible. And when she told me we could build on her family's land, it sounded like the best chance I was ever going to get. I wasn't thinking about marriage or promises far ahead. I was thinking that if I built here, it would tie me to her and to her life and keep me away from Angeli's. That was what mattered, because I knew if I went back there, I would burn through everything. So I agreed, and we went back to Angeli's, gathered the few things we had, and returned to Leyte together. There was a very small shack on her family's land, which wasn't really like a house, and it had no bathroom, but that's where we stayed when the house was being built. It was rough, but I didn't care. It was only temporary. Every day I watched the work. They would start and finish later on, and it was coming on so quickly. The first time since I'd left America, I believed that this was something that was giving me a sense of permanence that I'd craved all along. The cracks started to show before the house was even coming to a close, unfortunately. I'd told myself that $400 a month would be enough, but I was not prepared for what the reality meant. There were always small things, all the time. As you'd guess, money for her family, her cousins, things around the land, and although none of it seemed big on its own, everything added together was so much more than I could keep up with. I was nearly 3 times her age, and at that time I thought that was perfectly normal. I told myself it didn't matter, but when the requests started coming in, it shocked me. I wasn't used to it and I didn't know how to handle it. I tried to tell myself that this was just part of being with someone so much younger, and helping her family was expected, but deep down I felt really uneasy every time another hand was held out. The idea of being in Leyte, thinking about the house, was to have a very low budget, everything that I needed, and her, no one else, but instead I found myself counting every peso and wondering how long the money would even last. Nights that I thought would be peaceful turned into long talks about what else needed to be paid for, as if it was my problem. And even when I wanted to say no, I agreed anyway, because losing her felt worse. I told myself if I could just get through the bill, then things would calm down. Once the house was finished, life would fall into place. But already I was beginning to see that it wasn't going to be as simple as I thought. The days felt longer than I imagined, and the strain of watching the money go faster than I'd planned weighed on me more than I wanted to admit. I tried to enjoy the moments we had together, telling myself it was worth it, but the thought of how much I had left in the bank was always in the back of my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was sliding towards something that I couldn't control. By the time the house was finished, the numbers didn't look the way I told myself they would. I had told myself $400 a month would be enough, but within weeks of moving into the house, it was closer to 1,000, and no matter how many times I looked at the figures, I couldn't explain where it was all going. It was food, family requests, small things that added up, and nights where I gave in. I didn't want to. 3 months into living there, I looked at my account and saw how quickly the money was going, and I knew I had to do something. One evening, I sat her down and told her it couldn't go on like this, that the budget was 400 and there was no more. I tried to make it sound firm but fair, and I told her that if we wanted to have any kind of future together, we had to stick to it. She nodded and didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't happy. I thought laying down the rule would give me some peace and confidence in the relationship, but instead it made me feel uncomfortable in the house that I had paid for. Every request after that turned into an argument, every peso questioned, and I found myself second-guessing whether I was the one being unreasonable. I'd built the house thinking it would fix everything, and now I was sitting inside it feeling like they were closing in on me. I was watching the money drain away and there was nothing in place to replace it. I kept repeating to myself that I was retired, that there was no new income coming in, that what I had was all there was, and the thought of running out made me start to feel scared. I tried to distract myself with small things, telling myself that life was slower and cheaper than anywhere else. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the thought that I'd already lost control and I was just pretending to pull it back. 6 months later, the numbers were staring me in the face and there was no way to avoid them anymore. What had been 70 was 15. 70,000 to $15,000, and I couldn't lie to myself about it. I tried to cut things down and tried to hold to the budget, but it never lasted. There was always something, another reason, and every time I gave in, the total dropped more. Then, one afternoon, she came to me and asked for $1,000 for what she described as an emergency. I just told her straight, almost immediately, no, it's not possible. As if my words were rushing out of my mouth. I told her that the budget was $400 a month and we had to stick to it. An extra $1,000 on top of everything else extra is insane that you're even requesting it. She didn't accept it though. She kept saying that it was important, that it had to be done. And the more she pushed, the more I realised I could just never win. I'd thought the house would tie her to me and the budget would protect me. But none of it mattered when she wanted something. In that moment, I felt tired more than anything else. Tired of trying to hold a line that was never going to hold. So I just had to give in. I told her she could have it. And while I was handing it over, I made a decision in my head. From now on, I wasn't going to fool myself about the future. I knew what was coming. I knew the money wasn't going to last. And instead of pretending otherwise, I told myself I would make the most of what time I had left with her. I would enjoy being with her while I could. Get whatever happiness I could from the days we had to make the money somewhat worthwhile, and when the money ran out, I'd move on. It wasn't noble or smart, it was the truth. For the first time I felt I was being honest with myself. I'd come to Leyte thinking I was starting again, but standing there handing over that money I knew I was only running out. I knew it was over the day she came to me again with her hand out, after everything I'd already said. After I'd made it clear that the budget was $400 a month and no more, and she still asked. Not just a little. She wanted another $1,000 like it was nothing, like what I had already given didn't matter. And in that moment, something changed in me. I think that's the thing that hurts and pains me so much. The fact that everything I'd already done never seemed to enter her mind. It never crossed her mind because that was the past. Yet every little thing I gave to her over the time of us being together, I considered that to mean something. Yet for her, as soon as she got it, nothing else mattered. Only what she could get next. Up until that point, I told myself that it was love. I believed it because I wanted to believe it, because it was easier to think that she cared about me rather than face the truth. But when I saw the way she looked at me when I said no, I realised what it really was. She should never have asked above what I had told her. Not if it was love, not if it meant the same to her as it did to me, and when she did it anyway, I knew I could never win. The argument that followed was the last one we ever had. Her insisting it was important, me saying there was no more, no money left, no way to keep going. I was done. The look on her face made it clear I had nothing left to offer, and at that moment, whatever we had was finished. It had only been about the money all along. I packed up what little I had left, and left Leyte, devastated about failing so hard and so fast in retirement. The flight home felt like punishment, not for the money I'd lost, but for all the time I'd wasted convincing myself everything was real. Back in the States, I had no choice but to start over from the bottom. No savings, no partner, nothing at all. Just me taking whatever work I could find because I couldn't afford to sit still anymore, even at my age. The anger has never left me, and the bitterness stayed in everything I did, and all I could think was that I'd traded away the last chance I had for something that was never real in the first place. It should have been real, but I wasn't respected. And I thought I was respected more there than where I was in the States. Yet, I got it all so wrong.